Imagine, if you will, being 17 years old, a teenager, a loner, a lot of feeling and emotion. And you're in high school, you're 17. Somebody at your high school is raped and murdered. Okay? That's horrifying. It's sad. And because you're a loner, your classmates tell the police to look towards you. All right? So the police approach you, ask you to help solve the crime. If there's not a male role model in the house, you might be seeking that somewhere and feel you're doing a good job helping out the police. Maybe the police weren't looking so much to solve the crime as much as they're looking to close a case. So all of a sudden you become the number one suspect, and Jeffrey Duskovic lived that reality. For 17 years he was imprisoned until finally he was completely exonerated. It's a horrifying story. Let's listen to it. How are you doing today, Jeffrey?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you so much for being on here. And I do have my own flag, which is a pin. I'm patriotic, and we're on the same page, my brother. In yet another way, Free Speech Northwest, and I see you have it in the colors of the flag. So this is definitely going to be one of the stick out interviews that I do. And thank you again for having me on your platform.
Well, it's my pleasure, because you've gone through a horrific scenario in your life, a horrific situation, and I would ask you if you could please tell us what transpired.
Sure, absolutely. So the year was 1990. The city was Peekskill, middle class in suburbs in New York, ethnically diverse. And maybe as background, I kind of lived a double life at the time. I didn't really think of it that way as a 16-year-old, but I realize now it kind of was that way. After school, I lived in the apartment complex that I lived at. There were a lot of kids there and in the surrounding areas. And I suppose you might say I was kind of the life of the party. I mean, whatever I would suggest would be usually what we would do. If we were going to ride bikes, play basketball, swim, play Monopoly, video games, you name it, we did it. But that was kind of after school. In school, I was, the kids were about a year or two older than me, so I was kind of quiet to myself, and I really didn't fit in, and I didn't play very many organized sports. So a girl named Correa, who was an immigrant from Colombia, had been in the country for about a year and a half. She lived a sheltered life. She never went anywhere unless she was with her older sister or her parents. She was in two of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. She went missing, and ultimately her body was found a few days later, and she was found murdered and raped. So I got on the police radar because the police interviewed a lot of students from the high school, and some of them told the police that they might want to speak to me because I didn't quite fit in. I guess the theory is that loners are people who commit heinous crimes. I guess that was the theory. And another factor the police cited is they said that they felt I was overly upset at the victim having been murdered, considering we really had no relationship. We were not even really on a high-by basis. But really, I mean, I was a sensitive teenager, and I don't think I was all that different from the rest of the people in Peekskill. I mean, to the point that free mental health counseling was offered to anybody who wanted it. So lastly, they got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the characteristics of the actual perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching that. So for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they would speak to me as if I was a suspect, and the other half the time they would pretend like they needed my help to solve the crime. They would say things like, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They would ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinion was correct. Prior to being a teenager, I wanted to be a police officer when I grew up. So that theme, along with my age, 16, was how they roped me in. I came from a single parent household, and that intersected with the good cop, bad cop technique, in that I began to look up to the officer who was pretending to be my friend as a father figure. Eventually, they got me to agree to take a polygraph test. They said that some new information had come in uh, to their file, and they wanted to share that with me. But first, I would have to take and pass a polygraph test. So the next day, rather than report to the school, I went to the police station for the test. Because it was a school day, my mother and grandmother thought that I was in school, so they didn't call around looking for me. They drove me to the town of Brewster, which was in Putnam County. So across county lines, 40 minutes away by car, which meant that I was no longer able to leave on my own anymore. I was totally dependent upon the police. I didn't have an attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat. They gave me a brochure which explained the polygraph, but it had a lot of big words in it that I didn't understand. But I figured, I'm there to help the police, so what does it matter? Let's just get on with it. From there, he put me in a small room and gave me, by the way, the polygraph was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator. He was dressed like a civilian. He never identified himself as a police officer, and he never read me my rights. So he put me in a small room and gave me countless cups of coffee to get me nervous. Then he attached me to this polygraph machine, and then he launched into his third-degree tactics. So he invaded my personal space. He raised his voice at me. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Towards the end, yeah, that's a really long time. I mean, that's more than double the amount of time that per polygraph best practices, that's more than double the time that anyone should really be hooked up. So that was definitely an irregularity for sure. Yeah. So towards the end, he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." So that really shot my fear through the roof. And then the officer, pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he had been holding them off but could not do so any longer, that I had to help myself. Then he added, "Look, if you just tell them what they want to hear, they'll stop what they're doing. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested." Being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, just being concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and no one else knew where I was either loomed very large in my mind. There was the push-pull dynamic of the possibility of harm, and then this false life preserver he threw me. So I made up a story based on the information he gave me in the course of that interrogation and that I received in the 6 weeks run up to that. By the time it was said and done, I collapsed on the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. And obviously, I was arrested. I was charged with a murder and rape.
That's a horrendous story. It's not the first time I've heard of this scenario where the police sort of say, "We have all the information on you and you'll be sentenced less, or in your instance, go free if you just acknowledge that you did this thing." So it sounds like they really coerce and rope people into these confessions that aren't true.
I would agree completely, and I just want to share for the audience that coerced false confessions are not rare. They have accounted for 25% of the DNA-proven wrongful convictions, and also that particularly vulnerable populations are youth and people with mental health issues.
Oh yeah, I could just imagine how you could put somebody in some sort of a panic scenario if they had some sort of high anxiety or mental health issues at all, or are young. And in addition to that, I mean, it sounds like you were saying that you came from a single parent household, right?
Yes, I did say that. Yes.
Yeah. And so they gave you this feeling that you were helping the police during all these preemptive conversations.
That's right.
Yeah, they really led you to believe that you were sort of doing this duty that nobody else could do.
That's right. Yes. That's very perceptive of you to pick up on that. Yes, that is true.
Wow. So that really, it probably gave you somewhat of some confidence and trust in them.
Right.
Wow. Do you think that it would have been, now, was it a single parent as in a mother at home?
A mother. It was as in a mother, and then my grandmother lived with us, but there was no father. And that was how I came to look up to as a father figure, the officer pretending to be my friend. I mean, he was a detective, and prior to being a teenager, I thought about being a police officer when I grew up. So in a lot of ways, he was kind of a hero. He was who I wanted to be.
Absolutely. I'm wondering if there was the standard nuclear family situation. I'm wondering if your dad would have potentially gave some sort of additional, you might have confided in him, and he might have given some additional advice on how to handle these sort of scenarios.
Yeah, I think that that's fair to say, sure. But not only that, but I would go beyond that, and I would say that he would be a mature adult. He would understand the situation, and he could he could have taken some steps on his own as well.
Yeah, maybe preemptively told you, the police are looking for somebody, so be wary because they might try to rope you into something, and don't speak without an attorney or something.
Right, exactly. Yes, that's completely correct.
Wow. So now, how did it come about that you were finally exonerated or released?
Sure. Well, let me just walk through how I was convicted. That was how I was arrested.
Right.
Let me just share how I was convicted for a second.
Yes.
So before the trial, the DNA test result showed the semen on the victim didn't match me. But rather than acknowledge they made a mistake, they continued to prosecute anyway. The prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud. He claimed after this DNA didn't match me, which was 6 months after his autopsy, he then said, well, I remembered that I forgot to document medical evidence which proved that the victim was promiscuous. So that opened the door for the prosecutor to argue that that was the reason why the semen didn't match me. It was because she must have slept with another person before I murdered and raped her. Taking it a step further, he mentioned another youth by name that he claimed had slept with the victim, but he never got a DNA sample from this other individual. He never called him as a witness. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury. He got away with that in part because the victim's family was not coming to court. So they had no idea that what was being said about her in the court. I mean, basically, they trashed her reputation in order to wrongfully convict me. And secondly, my lawyer essentially did not defend me. So he never called my alibi as a witness. He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to challenge the confession, to argue that it was coerced and false. He never cross-examined the medical examiner. He literally asked him no questions. He should have never represented me in the first place because of a conflict of interest. So this other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of that same public defender's office, and specifically by the lawyer who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. And so that conflict prevented the defense from calling him as a witness. It prevented us from asking him for a DNA sample. When I was interrogated, it was not videotaped. There was no audio tape. There was no signed confession. It was just the cop's word for it. And so when they came to court, they left the threat and false promise out of the story. My lawyer would not allow me to testify. So when you defend a case where there's a false confession, you have to answer the confession. You got to explain it. You have to prove that it was false and bring it all together in your closing argument. But he didn't do any of that.
Wow. They just really ran you through. Like the people who were supposed to be representing you, you said that firm had another student that they were representing. So
yes, the same public defender's office. That's correct. I did say that, and you understood.
It sounds like that office was just trying to get, some sort of processing paycheck and just run you through, and not really try to put forth the kind of effort you would want someone defending you in this sort of a scenario. It's horrifying.
There were a couple of other quick irregularities that I'll mention in the trial. So one of them was that polygraph test results are not admissible in court unless both sides agree. But despite that being the rule, this judge created this backdoor rule, and he allowed the polygraphist to repeatedly tell the jury that I failed the polygraph. And that was prejudicial. That's kind of speaks for itself, right?
That seems like that'd be like a mistrial situation if they don't allow polygraph information into courts.
I completely agree. And another thing was that the victim's bra, along with her clothes, was entered into evidence, and the jury asked to see it. And that was important because one of the statements that they coerced out of me, I said that I ripped her bra off. So the jury asked to see the bra, and there are some bras that cannot be ripped off of a body. So that was when the judge announced, he said that the clothes, including the bra, had been left in the court over the weekend, and that the janitors thought that it was garbage, and so they threw it out.
Well, see, that's like evidence tampering. That's another potential mistrial situation.
And lastly, at the end, on the third day of deliberation, the jury sent a note out and asked, if we don't come up with a verdict, are we going to be sequestered over the Christmas holiday? And the judge said yes. So at that point, it was 11-1 in the jury room. There was one holdout juror that thought that I was innocent, and the other jurors were pressuring him. And then when they got that information back that they would be sequestered, the pressure ratcheted up, and they didn't want to be there for the Christmas holiday, and neither did he. And so he switched his vote to get out of there. And the end result of it all of that stuff that I mentioned, was that I was wrongfully convicted of a murder and rape and given a 15 to life sentence because I had been charged as an adult, sentenced as an adult, and sent to an adult prison. And I was sentenced despite the judge saying to me, maybe you are innocent.
Wow. There's not a lot of empathy through this whole system that you went through for your own humanity. Like, they didn't see a human being there. They didn't treat you like you were an innocent kid, even potentially. You know what I mean? They were just
right.
Like you were a process, and they wanted to close the books, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
That is so sad and sick. I'm so sorry that you had to go through all of this. It's beyond words even.
So I thought naively that the court system got better as you went up higher. So I went to the appellate division of first court. My lawyer, I had a different lawyer now, different firm, right? Different type of public defender. And this lawyer was incredible. She raised 10 issues. She argued that the confession was coerced. It should not have been allowed as evidence. She argued I should have got a mistrial because of what the polygraphist did. She argued I should have got a mistrial because of the missing evidence. She argued that I was innocent based on the DNA, that there was legally insufficient evidence, that the prosecution hadn't proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, that the verdict was against the weight of the evidence. She argued that the trial judge was biased. She raised 10 issues. Bang up job. Couldn't have asked for more. So the appellate court wrote that they said that I was not in custody, that I was able to come and go as I wanted. So they ruled that the statements were voluntary. They wrote that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which is still kind of a head scratcher because the DNA didn't match me. And they knocked out all the rest of my issues in one sentence. They wrote that they looked at the rest of my issues and found them either to be without merit or else not preserved for review. And they ruled against me 5-0.
It's just astounding that somebody who is not guilty of these crimes could be just prosecuted in this way and treated in this way. Wow. How does that happen? I mean,
well, I think it's look, I think they just wanted to win. I think they didn't want to step on nobody wanted to step on a colleague's shoes. Perhaps there was some tunnel vision as well, which is when they come to a conclusion and then they just work backwards and they ignore everything that's to the contrary. Certainly, there's judicial fault. There's the maddening emphasis on proceduralism over substantive justice. So I lost like I lost other appeals. So I'll come right back to that point. So the re-argument motion was denied in one word, denied. New York Court of Appeals, the highest court in the state, declined to give me permission to appeal to them. I lost in federal court because my lawyer was given the wrong information on the filing procedure. So my paperwork arrived 4 days late. And the next three courts upheld that ruling, including the U.S. Supreme Court. So that was 7 appeals that I lost. So when I say proceduralism over substantive justice, so why should it have mattered that I was 4 days late? Take that up with my lawyer, right? My appeal should not be dismissed. It should be determined on the merits of the facts and law that's being argued that my freedom is tied to.
Yeah, absolutely. You said something about how you were saying that it feels like they wrote a verdict and then wrote the whole like case to try to lead that way or whatever. They already decided your guilt.
Yeah, tunnel vision, right? Tried
to formulate things, and that's like the same thing as writing a book or a movie script or something. It's just they made up all this stories because they had to make up all of this stuff about you because you didn't do it.
Right. Right. Exactly. That's the whole point. Yes.
Wow. That is just, it's frightening that the system can work like that. How did you end up here?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when your appeals are over, the only way back into court is if you can find some new evidence or there's some change in the law. So I had no money to hire an attorney or an investigator to then try to find new evidence. So I embarked upon a letter writing campaign. I did that for 4 years. I went to the parole board where, because I maintained my innocence, rather than expressing remorse or taking responsibility, I got turned down for parole. I ended up here on the show and exonerated before that because one of those letters that I sent to a book author in care of a publishing company was instead sent to an investigator, and she believed in my innocence based on the DNA, and she got the Innocence Project to represent me, and then that was, so getting the representation was the key. Second thing was the district attorney at the time, Janine Pirro, who does the commentary on TV, the judge shows. So she left office, and her successor allowed me to have the testing that Pirro blocked me from getting several times. And thirdly, we got lucky that the actual perpetrator's DNA was in the DNA data bank. So when we took the DNA and put it into the data bank, it matched him. And his DNA was only there because, left free while I was doing time for his crime, he killed a second victim who was a school teacher and had 2 children. So on September 22nd, 2006, the conviction was overturned. I was released. I reported back to court on November 2nd, 2006, at which point all charges against me were dismissed on actual innocence grounds. And the actual perpetrator, who, by the way, confronted with the DNA, he confessed. So he was arrested, pled guilty, and was sentenced for the crime.
Wow, that is just that the levels of which this is terrible is that, in addition to everything that you've had to deal with, there's also this woman who was the school teacher who was had children, a family, and she was murdered because you were placed in jail and they assumed that the person was off the street.
That's
but
right.
They weren't off the street. So
Right.
So this whole thing where they wanted to force this guilt label onto you, this guilty label, they wanted to force that onto you. Kind of, it led to that woman's death.
It did. I agree with you completely.
That's terrible because, if anyone tries to force a guilty verdict on an innocent person, there's just, it would almost seem like there's like some responsibility they should share in that kind of situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I agree with you. Yes, you're right.
And there's
I want to. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I wanted to just discuss for a second all the difficulties I faced in reintegrating back into society. So there was psychological fallout. So like most people who have been wrongfully imprisoned, they have post-traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks, anxiety, feeling of having been frozen to time, processing things at a slower speed. So I went to mental health professionals 4 times a week for 6 years to overcome all of that, as well as help in dealing with activities of daily living. There was a stigma attached to me. Yes, I was in prison wrongfully for 16 years, but I was there for 16 years. How much of that rubbed off on you? Is it safe to be alone someplace with you? So when it comes to personal relationships, yes, that has proven to be an obstacle. World was much different now than when it was when I was originally wrongfully convicted. So cell phones, GPS, internet, Zoom had not been created before. Culture was different. Cities and towns look different. Different people live in that neighborhoods now. And so cumulatively, it felt like I was in an alternative world that I didn't belong in. It was awkward when I would meet up with members of my extended family because I knew who they were intellectually, but they were different people now, and so was I. So the overwhelming majority of my family had never come to see me, and the few that did, it was extremely inconsistent. I mean, with some of them, it would be like spaced out like 3 years at a time. So that was a challenge as well. I was released with nothing, and it took 5 years for me to be compensated. So as a result of that, I did initially lack stability of housing. And at one point, I was a couple of weeks away for the homeless shelter. Thank God for Mercy College, which not only gave me a scholarship to finish the bachelor's degree, which I was a year short of because I got GED and associates while in prison and a year towards the BA when funding was cut. So they gave me the scholarship. They gave me the meal plan, which helped so I could eat. And they allowed me to live on campus, which is how I avoided going to the homeless shelter, because I was just a couple of weeks from going. So those were some of the challenges that I faced.
Wow. There's some, it sounds like there's a few good programs out there that really helped you out. And thank you to those, that college, they gave you the,
Yeah,
but wow, just the type of, you're very strong. That's all I can say. I mean, it would take like some sort of extreme mental capacity to be able to handle everything that you've gone through. And then while you were imprisoned, wrongfully imprisoned, you've continued to, advocate for yourself and your own innocence. You got these, you were close to a bachelor's degree. Is that right?
I was close to a bachelor's degree. That's right. Yeah.
That is incredible, the way that you persisted and you stayed optimistic and fought through that type of anguish. Other people, who knows what would have happened, the kind of damage this psychologically has. And wow, I mean, what sort of, were there any sort of psychological things that you've had to deal with as a result of spending the time in prison, or would you?
Yeah, all those afflictions. Well, all those afflictions that I mentioned to you. I mean, but I did treatment for those. But so I would, so I like things to be in order, and I really, before I do something, I really map it out, and I stop, I plan, I think, I troubleshoot. Is there anything that could go wrong? How am I going to avoid anything from going wrong? If it goes wrong anyway, what am I then going to do in response? So I would say that I don't like sudden loud noises. I do get nervous if something I want to do and it's near and dear to my heart, and it's up to another person. So, for example, whether I get into law school or not, as an example, I have this feeling of dread, and I'm afraid to hope too much because I'm afraid to get let down, and I feel like most likely. And I don't like being misunderstood. So I feel like one minor thing could snowball into something big, and the end result of it all is some kind of dramatic calamity is going to afflict me. So sure. Those are some examples of things I've had to deal with. I used to have nightmares all the time. Even when I didn't remember the nightmare, I know I was having them because sometimes I woke myself up. And other times people in other bedroom or living room said, man, are you okay? I think you were dreaming. You were in there fighting somebody, or you were screaming for help, or you must have had a nightmare. So those were, and at times it's been difficult even just to fall asleep. My mind starts racing and I can't forget about, what happened to me. So all those symptoms, I mean, even just when I would go shopping and just so many different kinds of products and varieties and name brands and quantities and prices, sometimes my wagon would be half full, filled up with what I needed. And it was just too much. I just pushed the wagon away. Look, I'm out of here. I'll come back. I'll deal with this some other time. Or even just looking at the plethora of choices on a menu. I'll just have the same thing that he's having. So those are all things that I had to deal with, that I had to overcome. Happy to share with you, I've overcome a lot of them, but it would not be truthful if I said that I sit here now and I'm completely unscathed, that I have no after effects at all whatsoever. It's more that they're managed, but I'm not completely free of those things.
Okay. That makes complete sense when you talk about the psychological trauma that you've had to go through, because you had faith in this system initially when you were, this child, and then, you communicated with the police, and then you found out that it all ended up flipping and working against you. So of course you'd have the residual trauma in those situations where your fate is left up to somebody else. You've been betrayed while innocent in that situation. So yeah, of course you'd have long-term psychological trauma from that. That is just so horrifying. I want to ask you, has any of this impacted you spiritually? Like this whole
100%.
thing?
Yes. So I make sense of what happened to me in this kaleidoscopic way. So my mission in the world is to free people who are wrongfully imprisoned, the same position I was in, and to do some work on the preventative side, and to shed some light on broader justice reform, very terrible things that either I experienced or that I witnessed happening to other people. So sometimes people have asked me, well, are you angry? Are you bitter? I was angry for 1 week, and it nearly destroyed me. That was my first week. And then I said, I have to let this go. I want to enjoy my life as much as I can. I can't do that if I'm angry or bitter. I've lost so much already. Why would I want to, in effect, give over the rest of my life? If I was to be angry or bitter, I would really be the only loser in that scenario. It's not like I would be adversely impacting the people responsible. And the vehicle that allows me to actualize that is I take that energy and I channel it into the advocacy work that I do, which hopefully we'll talk about in a few minutes. And I have this mission in life, like I mentioned to you, and look, it's healing, it's cathartic, it's meaningful. My suffering counts for something, and I have some inner peace about myself, and I feel like that's really important.
Wow. Okay, so it sounds like you're enacting, you're doing things to make yourself like somebody will see you, and you will be a blessing to them with your help. That's
right.
That's amazing.
That's exactly right. And in addition to that aspect of it, I wanted to share. So my first 5 years, I was an individual of freedom. I was an individual advocate. So I was doing speaking engagements across the country. I caught on as a weekly columnist. So I wrote articles for 5 years. I was making regular media appearances, basically creating privacy for awareness. I was meeting with elected officials. And after about I got the bachelor's, I got a master's degree because I thought that the extra credential would further my advocacy initiatives. And after 5 years, I was financially compensated. And so I took $1.5 million from the money, and I started the Jeffrey Dusk Foundation for Justice, which would continue on the policy work and educational piece, but would have add the exonerative component. So we've been able to free 11 people in what, wow, has it been 11 years now, 10 or 11 years? We helped pass 3 laws aimed at preventing wrongful convictions. So DNA database expansion, videotaping interrogation, better identification procedures. I'm an advisory board member of a coalition group called It Can Happen to You, which the foundation is part of. And we helped pass an additional 5 laws We have 10 cases active now. We're doing policy work, New York, Pennsylvania, and California. And at some point, it became not enough for me to sit in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table. I wanted to represent some of the clients. I wanted to make some of the arguments. So I became an attorney, and in pursuit of the dream of exonerating others as a lawyer.
Wow. So you're an attorney.
I am an attorney, yes.
That's spectacular. So you're going to fight like hell for the people who were in your situation.
Yes, everything that wasn't done for me. I'm going the extra mile, buddy, because I know what's on the other end of that. And I guess in some ways you could say that, look, I'm trying to be the person that I wish that I had all those years ago, and even throughout the whole process. But but in addition, I want to share that it's empowering to me as well personally. And it is an additional. I feel even better about myself. It's an additional confidence factor as well. So, like a lot of things in the world, and even a lot of things that we've talked about in this interview, many things are true at the same time.
Oh yeah, yeah. So, I wonder. All the horrifying things that you've gone through,
yes,
you could say that there are some good things that have come out of this at the end.
100%.
You're saving lives.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm saving lives. And if I could share something with the audience, which is so lessons that can be extrapolated from my total life, everything we've talked about here, not merely the wrongful imprisonment or conviction, what other people could act on. So you set a goal, right? Overcoming adversity or any kind of goal, right? Goal, realistic plan. You should be able to look at it 3 or 4 different ways and say, yeah, you know what? I could see how that might work. Be flexible. Remember that the goal is the goal. The plan's not the goal. So if an unexpected door opens for you that moves you closer, then you should take that and keep moving towards the goal. Remember that there's no reason you can't accomplish something if you want it bad enough. There's only reasons why it might be more difficult. Don't be afraid of hard work. I really believe that when you work your rear end off, that's when one miracle, one breakthrough or another, that's when you're going to catch a break, however you want to phrase it. It's not going to just drop on your lap by you doing nothing and just daydreaming. And never give up. And when you can't continue anymore, and I reached that point different times in incarceration, different times struggling pre-compensation, different times in law school, different times trying to prep for the bar, I would say to myself, and this is what people should say, maybe this is the key moment. I was going to have a breakthrough, but because I gave up, it's not going to happen. So even though I can't continue now anymore, I'm going to continue anyway, just to see what happens on the other side. And once you get there, reach back for other people and do some work on the preventative side. And if you can do that, it'll be meaningful, healing, cathartic. It'll make the world a little bit better, and it'll make your suffering count for something. And I know for sure that can apply, say, to sexual assault survivor, domestic violence abuse survivor, someone homeless, debilitating disease, someone that's faced discrimination, someone who's faced racism. Because I've seen people from afar. Like I attended a fundraising event as strictly as an audience member. This woman had been sexually trafficked, and now she was sharing her story. She was raising money so that people could free people similar to her in her position. And there isn't such thing as homicide survivor advocacy. People have gone on to become advocates that have lost a family member. So I know that this generic formula can apply to many different life situations, challenges, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So make your pain count for something. Do something.
1,000%. Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Overcome it. Find a way to overcome it. Make it count for something. You got to reach back to people in the same position you were in, and you have to do some work on the preventative side.
Has anybody who was part of the process of wrongfully imprisoning you, has anyone ever said to you, I apologize?
Short answer is no. If I was to put a little more color to it, I would acknowledge that the prosecutor who was in the courtroom when I was exonerated, he offered me a symbolic apology. The district attorney offered me a symbolic one. So did the judge. But the issue is that none of them were their counterparts who were originally involved in wrongfully convicting me.
Yeah, that's who I was referring to. None of them ever. Wow. Well, I think we covered just about everything. I think it's a spectacular interview. I appreciate that you took the time to do all of this and to
thanks. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to quickly share, if people want, a couple things real quick. If you want to hear more about my story, definitely check out Conviction, which is a documentary short available on Amazon Prime. Another thing is, in terms of if you wanted to find me, my website's www.deskovic.org, DESKOVIC. There's a web form there that you can email me through. I have a public figure page on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And if you're moved by the story and you're an attorney, you should do at least one wrongful conviction case pro bono. And if you would like to help me to free wrongfully convicted people, I do have a crowdfunding site on the Patreon website, which is for people that are willing to be recurring monthly donors. So if 25,000 people, as an example, agreed to donate $3 or $5 on a recurring monthly basis, that would give us close to $1 million that we could use to increase our capacity. We'd be able to free even more wrongfully convicted people. We have attorneys, investigators, paralegals, other essential personnel. And we could do policy work in, beyond just New York, Pennsylvania, and California. So please, if you're listening and you're moved, please donate. Please share it by word of mouth and on social media. We need to get out of my network and into the network of many other people. My ultimate goal would be to have a chapter of the foundation in each state and ultimately in each country, because I really see wrongful conviction not simply as a New York problem or an American problem. I really see it as a worldwide issue. And countries where we do not hear about wrongful conviction, it's not because they're not happening. There's just simply nobody working on it. Very few people are working on it. My case is not rare. There's been 2,805 exonerations from 1989 forward across the U.S. per the National Registry of Exoneration. Wayne State University study estimates 10,000 people are wrongfully convicted each year. So we do have a really big problem. And I can't do all this by myself. I do have a team, but we need to add people to it. We have 7 cases that are approved that are just waiting. We don't have the capacity to move them. So those other people on the other end of those. So we do need people to contribute at whatever level that they can.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey Deskovic. We appreciate that you took the time to talk to us. And we want you to come back whenever you have something else you'd like to let us know. We'd love to hear about it. Okay?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And please share a link and with me, and I will definitely promote throughout social media. What a wonderful host you've been, and thank you very much.